Okay, in this quick video I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the changes that have taken place in Puppet Producer 1.3.1, and the biggest change in Puppet Producer in this version is that, for one, the prompts have been suppressed. So if you want to know what's going on inside of Puppet Producer now, at this point you're going to need to keep your eye out on the output panel. And this was a decision that I made because a lot of people are actually getting pretty good at using Puppet Producer, and they're finding the prompts a little bit annoying. And you know, it does make for a, you know, kind of a weird user experience to constantly be told, like, in your face what's going on when it's not necessary. So basically now when I select a shape and, for example, convert it into my upper arm, I'm not going to get a prompt, and I don't have to press OK, I don't have to press cancel, nothing happens, it just does it. Okay, so if you're not paying attention to the output panel, then you probably won't really see what's going on, but those prompts are still there. So if you have your output panel available or open, you still see what's going on. For example, here the selected shape was converted into a symbol first. If this is not what you wanted, press Ctrl Z to undo. Alright, and then it also tells you the shape was converted to right arm 0. You can also see that the pivot was created and added to the stage. Now this is just a general placement. I still do not recommend you create your body parts this way. It's not as accurate for Puppet Producer. Which also brings me to my next point. If you do in fact create your symbols ahead of time, so here for example I'm going to take this shape, I'm going to manually convert it into a symbol by pressing the F8 function key. Press F8. I'm going to put my registration point right at the center of that shape, and it doesn't matter what the name of that symbol is. I'll just press the OK button at this point. Now that this is a symbol, Puppet Producer is going to go, well, you know, there's a registration point at this location. Why don't we just put the pivot point right there? And for most cases, this is actually what you want. So I'm going to basically add the upper arm function to this symbol, click, and my pivot point has been placed exactly where the registration point is. This is particularly useful when creating your character templates, because you can easily create, for example, okay, this is going to be my upper arm for my character. I'm going to go ahead and convert it to a symbol, make sure my registration point is right at the center, and you know, rather than doing the artistic part and creating the arm first, I went ahead and just created my joint area. So now I can go in here. I'll just duplicate this shape real quick. I'm going to maybe make this smaller and just kind of join these two circles together. Alright. I'm also going to make a quick copy of this circle here for later use, which you'll see in a minute. I'm going to fill in this area there. But notice now that I have this symbol that's going to be my upper arm, I have it with my registration placed exactly at the center of that circle. So in Flash, I can test the rotation of that shape very easily, so I know exactly where it's going to rotate. Now I'm going to create my forearm for my character. I'm just going to paste it in the center, and that's basically just a circle that's exactly the same size as this bottom part was. So I'm going to go ahead and convert that into a symbol. F8. Doesn't matter what the name is. I'm going to place my registration point exactly at the center of that circle. Go in there, duplicate it, just move it down a bit depending on how I want my arm to be, and just kind of connect them. Fill in the gaps there, and now I have a forearm. Now I can turn on my outline mode here, so I can kind of adjust it there. Ideally you want to adjust it so you have like a perfect circle at that joint area, and you can test the rotation inside of Flash itself simply using the transform tools. And this is basically going to give you a more accurate articulation once you import it inside of Crazy Talk. So I'll do that with my forearm, and then I'll add one more. That's going to be my hand. I'm just going to place that right there, go inside of that symbol. I'm just going to quickly just kind of rough out a hand. Okay, so this hand is also going to articulate around that particular joint. So you have that setup. So you don't have to worry about drawing like straight lines and keeping everything aligned. Now when you go into Puppet Producer, you go boom, boom, and bam. Okay, your pivots were created exactly at the place where the registration point is located, and you know, and your nud is usually placed in a area relative to the originating pivot point. So, you know, you can do stuff like that. And inside of Flash, and like if you need to like basically reconstruct this thing or move it out of the way for whatever reason, you can always place that rotation point in your primary registration point, and you can move these items like this, like that, and keep everything in line, so everything always maintains itself perfectly aligned. So hopefully, if you guys can get a good grasp of this particular new workflow, you will be able to create your characters a lot faster and with more accuracy in terms of their range of motion and stuff. So that's the big thing. For the head pivots, for example, you know, you may create a head. I'm going to duplicate this so we can see two versions of it. Now, if you do create your head and you don't convert it into a symbol first, then Puppet Producer doesn't know where the registration point is. So it's going to give you something like this. All right, it's kind of random, you know, similar to the way it used to work before. And you'll have to find your own location where you want these pivot points to be. And you know, you continue using the same old technique the way that you've been using before, and nothing changes, and it's kind of, you know, meh. But if you create your symbol first, okay, now this is a head. We probably don't want the registration point to be right at the center of the head. In fact, we probably want the registration point to be closer to where the neck is going to pivot. So let's suppose this is a neck. This is where the registration point for the neck is. And in relation to this, in relation to, I'm going to go ahead and back out a little bit. I'm going to use this just as a guide. Now, in relation to the this neck, you might want that to rotate maybe along this point. So let's go ahead and do that. All we need to do is go inside of it. Just nudge the contents of that particular symbol so that the registration point is located along the area of your shape where you want your shape to rotate around. So we can take that, put it where it needs to rotate. Now I can go into Puppet Producer, click that, boom. And actually there was a little bit of a hiccup there because it jumped into my previous head. We probably don't want that. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's select the head and press our head item, and there we have our pivot point exactly where it needs to be, so it rotates around that particular joint. And our nud will be placed somewhere close to the pivot in relation to the head where it needs to be. Now, if you do have two items that are already labeled, for example, face 0, you might have a little bit of a conflict there. That's why when I did this earlier, it kind of put that up here, because it kind of went, okay, well, the pivot point's over there. I mean, that's the item is over there, so I'm gonna put it over there. So yeah, you'll get the hang of it. You know, just basically don't make duplicates. And if you have if you do feel you have duplicates and stuff like that, you can always select everything, use the eraser tool, it'll clean it up. So if I were to have two items of this, Okay, there's my head. There's my second head. Alright, and if I'm doing crazy stuff like on this side here, alright, okay, so it did that. You know what? You can always just clean everything up first with the eraser tool, and you won't have those issues. Anyways, in case you didn't know what the eraser tool was for, it basically removes all configurations from every selected item. So once we do that, all the configurations are done. Those pivots will stay there, but they're no longer configured to be pivots or anything else for that matter. So that's the eraser tool. That's pretty much it. Another thing that we did in Puppet Producer 131 is that I made it, I did change a few things in the components area, and this is something that happens in behind the scenes, and there were some issues where it was no longer compatible with Flash CS5 and below, so I went back and recreated those items so that they are once again compatible with versions of Flash going as far back as CS3. Now this may not always be the case. This is a lot of work for me, so at some point I'm going to have like a cutoff point, and I'm only going to make Puppet Producer compatible with maybe Flash CS6 and above. But for the time being, you can continue to use Puppet Producer with versions of Flash as far back as CS3. Let's see. Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you this. This is not something I tell people because, you know, they'll start abusing it or they'll start expecting support. And these are experimental features that I do use for my own purposes. And once those experimental features are, stable enough that I can go and feel confident that everybody else is going to be able to take advantage of them and use them, I tend to kind of bring them out into the front end. But there is a little bit of an Easter egg that's available if you want to use it. Some of these features work, some of them only work based on the system that you have. They do work for my system, and for all intents and purposes, that's all that really matters. So these are my personal functions that I'm currently working on, that I developed for my own usage, and there's absolutely no support available. So if you do make use of these features and they don't work for you, or they work in a way that's kind of random or whatever, I am not providing support for these features. Use them at your own risk. So the way you access them is that you go into the information panel. You're going to see this little experimental beaker icon there. If you click on it one time, then you click on any part of this graphic. Now you have 4 additional buttons, and depending on the version of Puppet Producer that you have, you might actually see more functions, and I am not obligated to tell you what they are, so just kind of use them at your own risk, play around with them. If you break your own stuff, that's your own problem. But it's some of these might actually be helpful. For example, this is a joint creation button. So if you are creating a character and you want to just kind of start with a framework first, you can always click that button, and it'll create a little joint system for you. So all it is, it's a symbol that you can use. For example, okay, here's one joint area for my upper arm. I'm gonna duplicate that, and that's gonna be the joint for my forearm. So I can convert that into a symbol, and I can actually start basically fleshing it out into a symbol that I can use for my forearm. Let's see here. Just connect these areas here. Did I break these apart? Control B. Let's see. So it's just kind of like a guide system that I use in my own personal workflow to speed up the creation of body parts and things of that nature. So here I've created a forearm. Let's see here, Control X, paste in place. Maybe there's a gap or something. There it is. And remember what I said earlier about that registration point? We got to make sure we align everything, or at least if you're using my particular workflow, align everything to the center of it. So I'm just gonna bring that there, just put it right there. That should be good enough. So there's my registration point, and all I need to do is go back and flesh it out with like custom artwork or whatever to make that into a true upper arm. Maybe the character's gonna have like big old biceps and stuff. Boom, there you go. Draw whatever things need to be drawn. Maybe he has a tattoo on his upper arm. So there you have that. But the big thing was that it was easier for me to just, you know, drop a couple of joints in there and flesh those out into an upper arm, adjust them a little bit so I can get that transformation point. And when it comes to, you know, rigging it with Puppet Producer, I just click it, places the joint exactly where the registration point is, and this character is going to be able to move his arm exactly at that location, and I can test it within Flash itself. So that's kind of what that button is for. Let's see here. There's this button. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on the system configuration and what you have on your timeline. The idea behind this particular function is that it's a magic wand that any item that's selected on the stage, you'll select every other item that also matches those parameters. So in this case, this is a movie clip symbol. I click it, every movie clip symbol on my stage becomes selected, and I can move it around. The idea behind this function is that sometimes you want to get the pivot points out of the way, but you don't want to, you know, screw around with your character. So you can select your pivot point, click that button, all pivot points on the stage will become selected. You can move them to a different layer, turn them off for a while, and continue to work with your graphics without endangering the placement or modifying your pivot points. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, you know, again, it's experimental and there's no support available for it. Another thing is that when you're working with symbols, in particular when you are making use of the mirror functions, for example, when you're going from front to back, any modification that you make to a symbol will also become reflected on the other instances of that symbol. Everybody knows that. So if I go into this instance of this symbol, modify this, well, that becomes modified too. So let's suppose this is the front torso. I want this to be my back torso. This is basically going to be a clone button. I click on it, boom, it clones it. Nothing really happened as far as you know. Even the output panel doesn't tell you. Okay, again, it's an experimental thing. But if you look in your library, you can see that there's this new symbol with this crazy string of numbers there. And if I go into this new cloned symbol, I can basically change it, and the changes take place without modifying this particular area. That's very helpful when you are using the mirror function. Let's see here. Delete, paste in place. Yes, replace existing items. So here's this character. I'm going to mirror him from front to back. And okay, well, if I were going to go in here, okay, so this is supposed to be the back of the character, right? Come on. Well, if I go in here and start doing different changes to this torso, then basically those changes that I'm making will also take place in the original symbol. We don't want that. So what we do is we clone it. Click on it one time, clone it, then we can go inside, get rid of that belly button, maybe add some back muscles, and now we can differentiate what belongs to the back and what belongs to the front. You might want to do that to that hip area and the hands. Oh, of course, yeah, the feet. Now this item is also particularly helpful when you're doing things on a character that are not exactly symmetrical. So let's say he's a pirate. Now we're stuck with the same situations where we want to create a peg leg, but in order to do that we have to modify one of the feet or one of the legs. Okay, any change that I make here will also take place on that other symbol, and I'm sure you kind of get the idea by now. So we select it, we clone it, we'll select that one, we'll clone that one as well. We'll make the change. I'm just going to make a quick change like this, nothing fancy, it's just for demonstration purposes. And we'll do that. Alright. Just a quick drawing with the mouse, nothing accurate, nothing special. Alright, so you get the idea. I was able to make that change in a way that it's asymmetrical. It doesn't match what was over here because it's completely new symbols, but the configuration, the placement of the points of the joints and everything remains intact. So that's where that comes in. And the last experimental feature is the rename button. And at any given time, you know, when I create symbols or whatever, there's always going to be random symbol names. I don't worry about the naming conventions because they don't really matter in the grander scheme of things. But basically what we do here is select everything except for the joints and the pivots. We remove we don't want to rename those, but we leave everything else selected. Now with everything else selected, we click it, give it a name, and click OK. Now we have a nice cleaned up timeline that is using, you know, the name that we gave it with the part, and assigns a number to it. And this is also helpful for people who are doing programming where you need a conventional naming system in order to further modify your character assets. So again, these experimental functions I'm providing with no support whatsoever. Use them at your own risk. That is what they do. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. They may work on your system, they may not. And I do not put myself under obligation to make those work. Those are experimental, and at some point they're going to be stable enough for me to move them to the front area of the software. And at that point, you know, you can have all the support you want. Alright, so that is Puppet Producer 131, and hopefully you guys can adapt to the new workflow, in particular where creating pivot is no longer using the same old system where, you know, it kind of just places them in a general vicinity. Now you know exactly where the pivot points are going to be, provided that you create your symbol first, and depending on, you know, what the body part is. So for example, this is going to be my character's head. Well, I have my registration point set up right there, so Puppet Producer is automatically going to put my primary pivot point at the registration point. Well, something has to be selected first. At the registration point, and my nud somewhere in relation to my original pivot point. Now if this is, for example, the hip region, now the hip is a little bit different, because the hip, what I recommend is placing the pivot point at the bottom when you create the symbol for the not for the hip, for the upper torso. When you create the upper torso, this symbol really needs to be at the bottom. Okay, now you can do whatever you want. Okay, it is your character. My particular workflow, at least now, involves placing this registration point right at the bottom of my symbol, and there's a reason for this. Okay, basically, I'm going to create this circle here. All right, so if I put my my pivot point at the bottom, when I rotate the upper torso is going to rotate along this area here. So my hip will have it at the center, but my upper torso will have it at the bottom, so that when I rotate, I don't get these this disconnecting shapes here. It rotates perfectly along that joint area. So that is something that I highly recommend you adapt yourself to. You don't have to. I mean, there's a million ways to do things, but this is how I do them. So I do recommend that registration point be placed at the bottom of that symbol. Now the hip itself, you can put the registration point right at the center. So we're going to convert that. Oops. Convert that into a symbol. For the hip, we'll put it right at the center, and when we go ahead and do the rigging part, click on the upper torso, boom. Okay, as predictable as we need this to be, we know that it's going to be at the bottom, so it automatically places my pivot point right at the registration point. That's exactly what we want. Now here is my hip area. Now the hip, okay, now the prediction is that, you know, Puppet Producer is going to place my pivot exactly at the center, or exactly where the registration point is. Now because of my particular workflow, I don't put my hip registration point right at the center. I do put the registration point of the hip at the center, but I don't put the pivot at the center. That's because I don't want any conflicts. If you put both pivots in the same place when you import it into Crazy Talk, you're gonna have weird stuff happening because that bone has no length to it. So what I do is I click on that and I actually place it a little bit below. Okay, so as far as the character is concerned, this is going to be the center of it. Now inside of Flash, it's still going to rotate along the registration point, but inside of Crazy Talk, it's going to rotate along this pivot, and that's perfectly fine. That's what we want. It's all by design, and if you stick to those things, you're gonna get a lot better characters with better range of motion, and they're gonna look a lot nicer when you actually animate them. So those are the differences. So if you want to, you know, once you know that, you can predict exactly where the pivot points are going to be placed for practically any item on the stage. Let's say that this is the arm of the hand. Well, the registration point is right there, so we know that the pivot point is going to be placed right at the registration point, and the hand nut is going to be placed slightly below. Okay, usually it takes the height of the symbol, adds to it, so it's going to be somewhere right here. See? It's very predictable and a lot more convenient now that you can predict exactly where the pivot point and the nuts are going to be placed. Not as predictable if you're working with shapes, because if it's a shape, again, Puppet Producer doesn't know where the registration point is, so it's just going to make a best guess. So here's a shape. I'm gonna tell it, okay, I want this to be a upper torso. Alright, we placed it right there, somewhere in the vicinity of that shape. And at this point, you're gonna have to continue doing some little bit of manual work the way that you've always done. So there's really no change in that, but if you're creating your symbols ahead of time before requesting Puppet Producer to configure it for you, you can get more accuracy in terms of where that pivot point will be located. Alright, I feel like I'm rambling a lot, and I think I'm done. So enjoy the new version of Puppet Producer. If you have any questions, feel free to create a ticket by sending an email to support@Sinistar.int, Sinistar int.com, and you know, let me know